Hey everybody. So this video is a follow-up to my first video about introduction to vibe coding. And a friend of mine reached out and he suggested I create a video around my current AI workflow, which I thought about, but unfortunately I just feel like these technologies are moving far too fast and that video will become antiquated pretty quickly. And so I actually had a conversation with my dad this weekend and it made me think about this, the title of this video, The Brutal Truth About AI, and just how technology has changed over my lifetime. And basically what I'm going to attempt to do in this video is play out where I think this technology is going to go and how best to position yourself for these changes. Now, of course, I could be absolutely wrong, but I just think there are a few indicators here that we can rely on and that may kind of put us in a good position for how to confront this coming change. So with that, what this video is actually going to cover is why everybody should be doing this. And by this, I mean vibe coding. What coding looks like as a designer, but also just any profession, really. How to learn quickly. Obviously, these technologies are moving so fast. And so how do we keep up with this pace of change? I'm going to talk about the engineering workflow, which is something which was intimidating for me at first, and I think is intimidating for a lot of people. And so I'm just going to briefly touch on that and talk about how you can kind of make it less intimidating, given it's actually not as hard as it appears on the surface. And then I'll close out with a couple of hacks and just things which I do to get pretty good output with these models. And it'll just give you guys a starting point for where you can potentially have a go at kind of working on some stuff yourself. So with that, the first thing I'm going to touch on is when people think about coding, they think about like this world, like this kind of nerdy looking at screens full of code. And I just want to say up front that I am completely the antithesis of anybody that wants to kind of work in that space. I remember doing HTML classes at school as a kid and just absolutely hating my life. It was just not something that I wanted to do at all. I'm very visually inclined. And so all that to say is that this isn't actually what vibe coding is these days. Like vibe coding means that you're using your ideas and how you can articulate ideas in order to get output that you want. And so this world of just like a very nerdy tech-based thing is a thing of the past. And when people used to say, learn to code, everyone was like, yeah, sure, because it's really not that easy. Well, now it really kind of is fairly easy to get started. So just wanted to say that up front. So I'm going to start this video with a bit of a precautionary tale. Again, as I mentioned, I had a conversation with my dad this weekend. So this is my mom, my dad, and me looking practically the same from when I birthed to today. But basically, my dad is now 68 years old. He's a painter and decorator, and he's still working despite the fact he's over retirement age. And his salary has largely remained flat since I was a child. And one of the things that many people don't know about my dad, but it's a kind of funny thing to mention, is that he still to this day has never sent a text message. He's kind of the epitome of a Luddite in the sense that he's incredibly intimidated by technology and just is unable to kind of embrace it, was unwilling to embrace it, and was kind of had a fear of learning. And I have seen over the course of my lifetime how that has held him back tremendously. Just even like I used to come back from college and university and he would ask me to help him try and find work online for like new painting jobs and things like that. And obviously I would try and encourage him to do it himself, but he was just so outside his comfort zone, he never ever faced it. And unfortunately, the world never came back around to provide opportunities to people like that. And so the world has continued to pass him by and he has kind of remained in his place. And that's just the reality of life to some degree, is that things move forward, and unless you kind of keep up with the pace of change, you will get kind of left behind. And so while I obviously wish my dad all the best, that is just the reality of life. At the same time that my dad was struggling with sending text messages, I was playing around with computers. And one of the first things that I really gravitated towards was Photoshop. And I remember at the time, it was kind of maybe the early 2000s, and there was a lot of photo manipulation and kind of grunge aesthetic. And for whatever reason, I was just really fascinated by this. And so the whole early part of my career, like I produced a lot of stuff like this, which I look at and cringe at now. But what it did do is it kind of taught me how to use Photoshop, and I got pretty competent with it at a very young age. And then when I went on to university, I ended up going into graphic design after there's another whole story there. But one of the interesting things that happened during that time was that there was a change occurring where there was like essentially the old guard graphic designers that kind of came from this world of, I forget what this stuff's called, like litter print or something, but basically graphic design back in the day used to involve a lot of cut and paste. You'd be like cutting out layouts and pasting them together. You'd be doing typography by hand. There was a lot of craft involved, and it was certainly like wasn't something that I looked down upon by any means, but the means of manufacturing had changed, and my skill set was much more up to date compared to some of the people who I was working alongside that were considered to be like my senior. And as a result of that, were getting paid a lot more than me as a junior designer. And so what actually happened was that I was a talented, hungry, tech forward young kid. And then there was like this whole middle layer of people who use the old tech, and then there was leadership with experience and money. And I remember one of my first days at an advertising agency I got a job at. My first day, there was a whole bunch of people in the company that were being let go. So while it was a positive day for me, like, oh, this is my first day on this job and I'm excited about it, I was actually seeing like senior people experiencing like real turmoil because they were seeing their jobs disappear. And I kind of witnessed that firsthand. And it was a terrible thing in many respects, but at the same time, like those individuals didn't keep up. And as a result of that, they were the first to go. Now, interestingly, like leadership kind of stayed in place. And I think there was a long period of time where this was the case, where essentially people in positions of power would, and I don't mean that in the kind of woke way, but I just mean like senior people in leadership positions would take advantage to some degree of young, talented, tech-forward individuals like myself when I was in my early 20s who didn't really understand business, but who kind of understood the tech. And so there was this period of time where if you were young and if you understood how to use computers, that you were actually a really valuable asset and you had this harmonious relationship. Now, I understood quite early on that companies actually needed me for those skills, and so I was pretty good at like negotiating, like, okay, well, I can actually do this stuff 3 times faster than people that are getting paid more than me. Why should I stay here? Like, and so that was the kind of conversation that I was having back then. But again, just like highlighting that there was this layer in the middle that didn't keep up, and as a result of that this is the fate that they experienced. Okay, now a bit of a pivot, but let's talk about investing. Now, in the world of investing, especially in early stage startups, you have what's called your seed stage. And oftentimes this is a company, or historically, they would have raised about a $1 to $2 million at a valuation of anywhere between 5 and 20 million. Typically, if you're a YC company, they'd often try and get a $30 million valuation. But the point I'm trying to make with this is that in the world of old, and I'm talking 6 months ago, companies would have raised £1 to £2 million in order to basically give an engineer or a couple of engineers a year or two's runway to kind of build a product and then get product market fit. Now, this part of the investment stack is largely going to go away, or if it hasn't already. And the reason for this is because these vibe coding tools are making it so easy to build new things, and especially like even for non-technical people, that there are really no reason now to have to raise that first couple of £1 million, where historically you would have used that to kind of pay an engineer to help you build something. And so, yeah, this is going away. And if there is still seed stage venture capital out there, it's probably being used for businesses that kind of have something that they need to create in order to open up whatever it is they're working on. So, i.e. the means of like creating, let's say they need to purchase machines or factory space or some kind of hardware component that's going to help them to create whatever it is they want to create. It's no longer being allocated to engineering resource. So what does this mean? Well, I actually think this means that if you are talented, hungry, and tech forward now, you don't even need that leadership experience and money layer. And so basically, if you're a very, very competent creator of any domain, you kind of have all the means necessary now to actually create things. And this is like, if you are that way inclined, this is incredible. Like, this is like revolutionary. All of a sudden, the things that maybe you needed other people's kind of buy-in on, you can just create yourself for the first time ever. And so that's what the world is experiencing. And if you happen to fall into that cohort of what I would call makers, or like maybe have a bit of an entrepreneurial streak, then the world is your oyster in many respects. So my prediction is that we're going to see a massive fragmentation and an explosion in innovation unlike anything we've ever seen. And you're already seeing this. So like, this isn't a bold statement, but I think it's going to continue to move down that path, and this is going to be the future now for the next few years. And I'll explain why I think this is. This is just a couple of screenshots I took from my Robinhood account, and there's a part on Robinhood where it shows you how many employees some of these companies have. And so you'll see here, you've got Amazon, they've got over 1.5 million employees, which is unbelievable. Microsoft, 226,000. Apple has 166,000. And you can basically go down the whole of the S&P 500 of like some of these big tech firms. And many of them have hundreds of thousands of employees, many of them earning well over 100,000 a year. Because they're in these kind of mature states, a lot of them are kind of in comfort mode, and disruption is going to start happening all over the place. And one of the first things that these companies are going to do is look at how this AI technology can improve efficiency. And my prediction is, obviously, as we're starting to see to some degree, many of these jobs will go away. It's not so much that they don't need to be done anymore, it's that they can be done at a fraction of the cost with a fraction of the employees. Now, obviously, that's terrible for humanity, or if you work in one of these companies and you have a family and everything, but that is the writing that is on the wall, and that is going to occur. And let's just be honest, like employees, if you run a business and the goal of the business is whatever the goal is, employees aren't great because they require holidays, they have opinions about things, they can get offended, they can be sick, like all of these, it's just, that's what human beings are. That's nothing terrible about that. But basically, when you have these AI companies that are looking to create efficiency, or even these companies that are creating robots, which I know sounds crazy, but right now we're seeing robots kind of like loading dishwashers and things like that. But the real prize is these big like workforce numbers that you see, where these companies can replace manual labor with robots that don't like eat or sleep and need holidays. And so it's only inevitable because of the cost savings that can occur that those transformations are going to happen. And so we're going to see huge layoffs, especially in large tech firms where there's a massive overhead of kind of workforce employees doing menial jobs that can be replaced by AI. So what does that mean? That means that operators are going to enter unemployment. They're going to be forced to use AI because basically in order to get a new job, they're going to have to be really competent with these new tools. And then we're going to see a niche idea explosion. And what I mean by that is all of these individuals that are forced to use AI, they're all, they have their own interests, they have different hobbies. And when they're trying to create things and figure out how to like use these AI tools, inevitably they're going to try and build things that are of interest to them. And so we're going to see people that come from big tech firms that are used to being on big salaries and maybe have a bit of disposable income, creating a bunch of like really interesting niche technology solutions that nobody ever anticipated previously. And so this is my prediction, basically, is that every layer of large organizational structures is going to be innovated on. So if you're working in recruiting, or if you're working in ops, or if you're working in, product management or design like me, basically every layer of the stack of whatever makes a company, there are going to be changes and shifts in how what those actions look like inside of a company. And so you kind of need to be up to date on how those changes are happening, because if you go for your next job interview and you don't know about any of these new emerging startups and how they're disrupting the space that you're in, well, then you're already like several steps behind. And then ideally you would be the one innovating on the space as opposed to just following the latest trends. This is just something which we're all going to have to face, and it's going to be difficult for everybody, but this is the harsh reality of what's about to occur. So that's the background. Now let's talk about some other things, such as coding as a designer. So it used to be that I was everybody's first call, and I don't mean, there are lots of people like me out there, but basically people that are able to take an idea from just an idea to something in reality. So I would get emails or I would get phone calls from friends or friends of friends, and they'd say, hey, I have this idea. Can you help me do the branding, do the website? Like, can you help me write the script for the marketing campaign? Like, I've pretty much done everything over the years. But what I'm seeing more and more nowadays is that people send me some version of this, which is like, this is my visual representation of a vibe coded product. Basically, it's the scaffolding of an idea that kind of works, but it's off. It's obviously not 100% there. And so, like, I guess a lot of people would call this AI slop. I think where we're at right now, and this is the metaphor I've used, is that when you go through an industrial revolution, let's say furniture of mid-century was of exceptional quality. Well, we're going to the IKEAization of like web and coding. So what we're going to see is we're going to see an abundance of like poorly made stuff, but it's stuff nonetheless. And from that stuff, we will like certain good quality ideas will emerge. And so we'll see a lot more of like this kind of thing. And there is nothing wrong with this kind of thing, just to be clear. Like, this is how everybody learns. Like, you can't create works of art overnight. But so basically, yeah, we're just going to see a lot of slop in the best way possible. That's how we progress and make progress. And so I think as a designer, you have there's a question you need to ask yourself. It's, are you going to be a force multiplier of other people's ideas? And so I think this lends itself well to people that maybe don't have good business acumen or an entrepreneurial kind of streak in them. You're just one of these people that loves creation, but you're not like trying to make anything per se, or like you just want to be an executioner of somebody else's concepts. And then there are people that want to create their own ideas. So I think one of the beautiful things about vibe coding is that for the longest time, like, designers, I think, have always had incredible ideas, but we've been really unable to execute on them because it requires an engineer, and the brain of an engineer and the brain of a designer don't always kind of perfectly gel. So like having those harmonious relationships has been difficult over the years, but now those roles are going to start to merge. And I think as designers start to learn more of the engineering technology and have a bit more respect for how engineering architectures work and the difficulty of those things, we're actually going to see a lot more collaboration between those two disciplines. And then there will also just be really competent individuals that can just do the full stack. And so if you're one of those people, like, maybe creating your own ideas is the way forward. And then there's, I think, what I would call maybe my approach, which is do both. You know, I have a good job that pays me well. I'm going to continue to do that, but then I'll continue to dabble on the side and build things. And who knows, like, maybe something will take off, maybe it won't, but it kind of keeps me sharp at the same time as like playing it safe, which is maybe one of my strengths in life, is always having a fallback. So what should you create? I think there are infinite answers to this question, but I think just like some super low hanging fruit is, firstly, think of things that scratches your own itch. And so what I mean by that is, obviously you have your own interests, and I'm definitely seeing most people I know are doing exactly this approach, which is they have something they're interested in, they're playing around with vibe coding tools, and so they create something which is like somewhere in the middle between they want to improve upon an existing product that they think isn't good enough, or they just want to build something that they think should be in the world around the thing that they're interested in. And these businesses that, like, this is where it's going to get interesting, because not all of these businesses are going to be big businesses, but they might be enough to sustain like one or two people and give people nice lives. And so I'm really interested to see kind of the emergence of these like more niche, novel companies that are kind of keeping people afloat, and actually more than afloat, like making them thrive. The second area, I think, is apps. Like, there's a lot of discussion around whether the user interface layer is going to go away and we're just going to talk to a chat box. And I think there's certainly a possibility of that, but I definitely think that for the time being, while everybody has an iPhone in their pocket or an Android phone, apps are still an easy space to work in right now. And it's also something that a single individual can build and maintain on their own. There are plenty of developers out there who have 4 or 5 different apps in the App Store, and that's how they make their living. And so, yeah, apps, I think, if you have a decent idea and you can build something of high quality, I think that's still a perfectly reasonable space. Then there are niche data sets. And what I mean by this is, like, data is incredibly valuable these days, but there are a million different ways that you can monetize on data. And so creating an idea where you start to generate interesting data sets that can be used in other ways is a potentially really fruitful area of exploration. Next, I would say is workflow improvements and automations. I think this is really useful because if you can show how you can improve workflows and automations, at the very least, it makes you incredibly employable because you can say, hey, I can go into some part of the business and improve how it operates. So that's an easy one. And then just anything that saves people time and money. Now, it's easy for me to say that. It's much harder to actually execute something that does that. But anything which saves people time or saves people money is typically something which will take off pretty easily. Next thing I'll talk about is just how to learn quickly, or at least how to kind of get back up to speed with some of this stuff. And so I've got two metaphors that I like to use. The first is jiu-jitsu. So I still do jiu-jitsu. That's a nice tongue twister on occasion. And one of the interesting things about jiu-jitsu is that you don't put in white belts with black belts and expect the white belt to be competent. And so there is in terms of learning, I think one thing I really learned from jiu-jitsu was the idea that the thing to do is to face the challenge which is immediately in front of you. Okay, I'm getting choked out with this same choke 50 times. How do I defend that choke? And so that same approach to learning, I think, works really well when it comes to things like technology, is you will run headfirst into the same issue several times, and at first you may avoid it. But then it becomes a pattern, and one of the best things you can do is just to tackle that problem that's directly in front of you. And once you understand it and are over that hurdle, you've got a bit more comprehension and you can move on to the next thing. Similarly, another way I like to articulate this is like a spider's web, because when a spider first starts to do its web, it starts from the outside and it starts to work its way in. Essentially, there's just a giant hole. If there's a fly going by, it's just going to go through the middle of the web. And over time, the web, like it has these anchor points, and things start to come together. And over time, as the web comes together, I kind of use that as like comprehension. So the more you immerse yourself in something and the more you comprehend it, all of a sudden you now have a net for which ideas can get trapped in. Whereas previously those things might have gone over your head. Like now, for the first time, you can actually grok what the concept is, and that only becomes easier over time as more of your web is formed. And so I can't pronounce this word, but if you have sofa phobia, I believe, you're fucked to some degree. And what that word means is it's just a fear of learning. And there are people out there that I think are like this. I mentioned my dad at the very start. What does it take? Maybe half a day to figure out how to send a text message, even if you've never seen one before. But still to this day, he never has. And that's because to some degree, there is like a fear around having to go through that learning curve. Another thing which I think is just immensely helpful is understanding the lexicon or the jargon of an industry. And this is what the subject matter of my first video was, which was an introduction to vibe coding. Was you can go back and listen to it if you want, but essentially I just go through maybe it's like 10 or 12 different terms that you're likely to hear when you first start, and kind of break it down in a very simple way so that like you can comprehend what those things are and feel less intimidated by them. And I think this is funny that there are certain industries that kind of wrap all of the perceived success in jargon. Like when you listen to the TV on, say, like the financial news, and they use all these words that you're unfamiliar with, it's a way of kind of having like an insider culture that keeps other people out. And I don't think it's always intended like maliciously necessarily. But the point is that if you want to be an insider, or if you want to understand what people are talking about, you have to be prepared to understand the language. And there is no industry where that statement is truer than in the world of engineering. Essentially, it is wrapped in jargon and lexicon. And once you understand it, it's actually pretty simple. But when you first are confronted with it, it seems overwhelming. And then it's just, so once you have all these things, and the reason why understanding the language is important is because you need to be able to articulate ideas. I actually heard somebody say that they thought that the people who are best suited to thrive in the world of AI is people with like English literature degrees, because we used to think understanding multiple languages was really valuable, but actually it turns out that like depth of your language is actually probably far more important, because it helps you to articulate your ideas and get them communicated in a way that people understand, or in the ways that AI can understand. And then I think it comes down to, are you prepared to do things and fail over and over again, even though what you do doesn't look good or doesn't work as expected. Like that is literally an essential part of any learning curve. And just like being prepared to create that Cristiano Ronaldo statue with a cross eyes is like, it's just part of the process. And the sooner you confront that and kind of go through it, the better place you'll be in ultimately at the end of it. So fail fast and then go again. And then just keep doing that until eventually you're in a place where you feel competent with the tools. The last metaphor I'll use here is, I'm not sure for any gamers out there, but when I was a kid, I used to be really into Final Fantasy X, and it had this thing called a sphere grid. And as you progress through the game and you accrued points, you could essentially like pick which areas to improve upon your armory of weapons in which to kind of face the challenges ahead. And this is literally a metaphor that I feel like for life, is that every time you go and try and learn something new, like, is it adding to your arsenal of tools that you can use to then be competent in life moving forward? And I think vibe coding is an essential skill set for the modern era. So this is actually me regurgitating an idea from advertising boot camps that I used to host in London back in the day. But I used to always talk about this idea that I referred to as the incremental edge. And essentially what I meant by that, and this is a known thing, this isn't a new idea, but early adopters have a disproportionate advantage. And especially if you can have some kind of breakthrough early on in your trajectory, over time, that edge becomes a much wider gap. So we're seeing here 2 lines, and the one on the bottom is kind of, they're there, but they're not embracing things fast. The upper line, like let's say you get a breakthrough early on in your career. Well, what happens in those instances, or if you embrace technology early, is that any future opportunity will come to the person with that edge. And then as those opportunities continue to accrue to that individual that got a head start, the gap will only widen over time. So just to be super transparent and clear, like, I think we're all in the early stages of this, and a few of us are a little bit ahead. And I think maybe a year from now, if you're looking to get into this, you're probably too late. I don't think you're too late now. I think if you start today or start in the next couple of weeks and get up to speed, you'll very quickly catch up to where people on the cutting edge are at. I don't even necessarily think you need to be on the cutting edge. I think if you're like a super brained engineer, you're on the cutting edge. But I think if you're just like putting in some time on the weekend, like an hour or 2 here and there, or you're trying to think about in your day-to-day work, like how you can improve through implementing AI workflows, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about that's going to give you an edge and that will pay off dividends over time. Okay, let's quickly talk about the engineering workflow. So when it actually comes to creating stuff using vibe coding, most people create stuff on their computer, and that's what engineers will refer to as local. So that means that it's being done on your computer and it's not like live on the internet. Now, when you push a website to a hosting company, that essentially becomes the live working site. That's what the world can see. And then if you're making changes, you're typically making changes on your machine first and on what would be referred to as like a local version of it. And all that essentially means is that you have a version of the live website where you can make changes, you can see what's being reflected, but that isn't being pushed to everybody else in the world yet. That allows you to experiment in like a sandbox, like an environment that allows you to play with things and see if it works without having to distort the live functioning site. And then when you're happy with it, you can push those things to a hosting website in order for those changes to go live. Again, I'm using a website as an example. It's just the easiest workflow. It's kind of how these things work today. Now, for designers, just using design as an example here, and again, apologies for how ugly these slides are, but we're used to collaboration tools like Figma, where multiple people can kind of come into a single file and work together simultaneously. And this is a workflow that many people are familiar with now. Like pretty much every tool, whether it be like spreadsheets or Word documents, you can do multiplayer mode. And the way multiplayer mode works in the world of engineering is they use a website called GitHub. And essentially what GitHub allows is if multiple people are working on a version of a product, and the GitHub is essentially like a replication of the live code, and then people can duplicate that onto their computers, and then they can run locally whatever's on the GitHub and make changes to it. Now, the issue when it comes to coding is that if multiple people are making changes, like how do you funnel them back into the the source of truth code base. And that's what essentially GitHub does, is it allows people to create pull requests or essentially make changes to the live code. They can queue them up, and then GitHub will review the code changes and identify any errors. And so what seems like a very complicated workflow in terms of like how do all these engineers work simultaneously to change a single code base becomes a hell of a lot easier through the use of tools like this. Now, this is probably the hardest thing for people to get their head around in terms of how you can go from just like building individual prototypes to collaboratively as a group. Like if there was nothing else to learn, I think understanding this workflow is really like the breakthrough moment for most people when it comes to like how to collaborate with regards to code. Okay, and then lastly, I'll just cover a couple of hacks and things which I do on a day-to-day basis. And I'm mainly focusing on the idea of what people at home can create. And the reason I am thinking about it that way is because I think the best way to learn is for you to just set yourself some independent projects that you want to build and then go ahead and try and build them. Because obviously what you can do in your day job is great, but like how are you going to push yourself that little bit further? And so one of the things I tell all my friends that are looking to create things is I say, create a PRD. And going back to word salads here, what is a PRD? So a PRD is a product requirements document. And what I've got on screen here is a template prompt that I think will go a long way to help people to kind of create whatever it is that they want to create. And essentially what a PRD does is it outlines all of the requirements for a given product that would typically be given to designers or to engineers in order to kind of come up with solutions. But now we don't have to come up with the solutions necessarily. We can feed that PRD document into these coding agents and let the coding agent come up with a lot of the answers for us. And so when you're thinking about like, oh, how do I integrate payments? How do I get a map into my product? How do I do identity verification? All these things which are incredibly intimidating on the surface, once they're articulated in the PRD, you can feed it to the LLM and say, okay, how do I solve these things? And it will come up with solutions for you. And it's literally a case of kind of being persistent enough and patient enough to go through the steps with the LLM as a guide to help you integrate those things into whatever product it is you're looking to build. And so what I would recommend, I'll probably copy and paste this in below this video, but you can also just pause this video and copy it, paste it into your LLM and include your idea as part of it, have it ask you questions. And then once it creates this document for you, that is what you're going to then copy and paste into an LLM. And that will get you so much further than just like trying to articulate an idea directly to the machine, because it will account for all of the edge cases and the architecture and all these things that you probably don't know quite yet. And then as you continue to work on these projects and do more and more of them, you'll start to notice patterns, and all of a sudden it will go from you're just relying on the LLM to articulate things for you to all of a sudden you can understand it for yourself. The next thing I'd say is if you just rely on the visuals of these tools, they're going to come out pretty poor. And I'm not saying that what you see on screen here is wonderful references, but I think these are just like, it's just me referencing the fact that I use Pinterest and all these other inspiration tools in order to find references to how I want things to look. And the LLMs are very, very good at identifying patterns in designs that you provided them and then replicating them in the code that it outputs. Now, that's not going to get you all the way to a really polished design, not by any means, but it will certainly help you get there slightly faster. Another hack in a similar vein is you can actually go to websites that you like. You can copy and paste the URL into the coding agent and reference exactly what it is you like from that website. You might be like, I really like the footer on this website, or I really like the way the about section works on this website. And then it will go in there, it will scan the website, it will identify how it's formatted, and then you can replicate it on your own website or whatever tool it is you're trying to build. So I think I'm getting towards the end of the video here, and I just wanted to point out that, you know, I've mentioned websites. I think websites are kind of the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest thing to create. But code is the underlying architecture for so many things, data visualizations or hardware, connected home devices, or visual effects for films. Like all of these things, like under the hood, are actually powered by code. Gaming, for example, is another one where all games, like behind the visuals that you're seeing on screen, are actually code. And so don't just be restricted by applications and websites. Actually create real world things. And this is where, again, I just think we're in this world where the limitations are just don't exist anymore. And so have some fun with it and go and create some amazing things. So I'll leave you with this. I think the world right now is incredibly uncertain, but I think optimism in the face of uncertainty is somewhat a recipe for success. I think luck is a huge factor, but to win anything, you really have to be in it. You have to be playing the game. And right now, we're just seeing just unbelievable changes. And so the best way to be prepared for that is to actually be involved in it. And so if anybody has any questions, again, I'm always here as a resource. And yeah, leave some comments below. Let me know where you disagree. And I'm curious to see how all this plays out for myself as well as for everybody else. But I hope this goes some way to kind of prepare you for what's to come. So thank you. Bye for now.